Death to the false emperor!
Hi everyone and welcome to another paints tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be carrying on with the Abaddon series. We're going to be focusing on the glowing around his face, the face himself, some non-metallic silver, and the skulls and bones. So first off, what I've done is I've just base coated around the inside of his face and the gorget around that sort of area in wine red. So all the areas that I want to be glowing, I've just used AK wine red and just base coated everything in there. If you're using the Citadel range, you'd use Screamer Pink in there. So I watered down the wine red just so it flowed in there a lot easier, but you're basically covering all the inside areas of the wine red and some just outside areas where I wanted to catch the glow. The second colour we're going to use is AK Blood Red, nice intense red colour. If you were using Citadels, you'd use Evil Sun Scarlet. It's just as good for this. In fact, both of them are very similar in their pigment consistency and colours. So with the Blood Red, what we're actually starting to do here is pick out where I actually want the intensity of the glow to be. So the brighter colour is your hotter area. So for this, it's sort of edge highlighting around the area around the armour that's by his face, picking out, and that's the front parts as well. There's a couple of little spiky bits that are sticking out there, so I've captured those on with this red colour. And any pipes and cabling, pick out little bits of areas of those as well. And then I'm also picking out a little bit on the inside of his shoulder pads, just where the glow would be reflecting off the gold in those areas. Try and remember that where the light catches needs to sort of make sense. So like it's good to capture the undersides of pipes. Don't capture the whole of the pipe, just the underside of the pipe. That means it doesn't become overbearing, and you want some contrast when you're adding in these light effects. So always have your brights next to your darks, just so that it makes it look like it's glowing a lot more. But this is all personal preference. There's a lot of images at the end where I've captured this, where you can see where I've been putting it, but it's mostly on edge highlighting and any areas on the pipes that are glowing from underneath. I'm imagining the light is coming from up and under the helmet area. Then I'm obviously making a bit of a mess of his face, but don't worry about that at the moment. We're going to go and paint the face just after this part and add some glowing effect around. So yeah, just add this Blood Red or Evil Sun Scarlet on the areas that you want to glow. I didn't water this paint down at all. It's straight out of the pot. On the wet palette it adds enough water really to water it down. So once I've done that, what I'm going to do now is I've used AK Tenebrous Grey, and I'm just painting back in all of his face, the tops of the pipes, basically anything that I covered with the wine red and blood red that I didn't want to. I'm just painting over that again. I want to bring everything back now to a base coat, a dark base coat, and then work my colours up. You can do this in different ways. I prefer working like this. It's a little bit haphazard, but it's developing as I paint. This model was actually an eBay rescue, and the face was already glued in place, and it's the face with the face mask. Ideally the other Abaddons have the full face showing, which has got a little bit more detail to it. So all I've done there is with the Tenebrous Grey is just base coated everything back into the dark colours. Now we're going to move on to the face. The face is quite a straightforward recipe, so it's the Citadel Bugmans Glow. Added quite a hefty drop of water here, because what I find when I'm going for sort of a grim dark look to my Abaddon is adding in multiple very thin layers allows to give some definition in the shadow areas as well. Just a little bit out of focus there, out of the shot. But all I'm doing here is just adding very, very light layers. It's more than 2 thin coats, it's 3, 4, 5 thin coats. And what this does naturally is you can then move away from your darker areas and focus on the brighter areas just with the same colour. So you even get tonal definition just with one colour paint. So yeah, water the Bugmans Glow down and then just build up your layers, gradually getting more intense with the Bugmans Glow. And it just gives that grim dark impression, especially with that Tenebrous Grey as the base coat. With the base coat done, then I'm just moving into the next 2 highlight layers, which are going to be with Cadian Fleshtone and Kislev Flesh. Flayed one Flesh is used, not Kislev Flesh is too bright. Flayed one Flesh. 2 quite big jumps in intensity there. So water them down a little bit, and then add the Cadian Fleshtone, picking out all the areas you want to be highlighted. So I actually, on his forehead, I add them in little lines, tiny little lines, which is almost the wrinkled forehead it kind of gives you. Pick out the eyebrows, pick out the top of the nose, the cheekbones, anything that stands out on his face, pick out now with this first highlight. And then it's exactly the same principles with the Flayed one Flesh, just pick out your much brighter areas with it. I actually make the face a little bit too bright. I wanted a very subtle, almost dark face so that the red glowing effects stand out more. I didn't want the highlights to be too bright, which means that the glowing effect highlight that we're going to put on is darker than your flesh tones. I always like to have my intense glowing effects to be brighter than anything else on the model to make them really stand out. So once you've done the highlights with Cadian Fleshtone and the Flayed one Flesh, I then water down quite heavily some wine red. It's about 5, 6, 7 drops of water, and then do an all over wash of the face with the wine red, and then just bring back a little bit using Cadian Fleshtone and the Flayed one Flesh just on those top points, just to bring back some intensity of the highlights. But the base coat of Bugman's Glow over the Tenebrous Grey and then washed with that wine red gives it some contrasting colours, some character and some extra life to the model. Okay, what I'm starting to do now is just I'm adding some of the blood red and wine red onto the head itself, just to give the start of the glowing effect. So where I want the red to be shining back on the top of his head, I add a little bit of the blood red to that area, and I do that on the front part and the back, just where it looks like the light is naturally going to be hitting those areas. I then do the same principle on any of the pipes and cables and around his mouth, any of those areas that are metallic that you want to show the red glow from his internals to be reflecting back on. Just add a little bit of that blood red as the reflection points. And this final step here is I'm just adding back some of that base colour of Bugman's glow next to where the blood red is, to blend that from the blood red back to the flesh colour, which darkens down the area next to the glowing effect. So the start of the glowing effect is done by using just white straight out of the pot. So I'm using AK Intense White, but Skull White. There's loads of different whites out there. Once you've got your favourite white, this is mine, then grab it. And what I'm doing now is this is going to be the base colour for the actual fluorescent paints we're going to be using over the top. So where you want to be your brightest reflection points, or where the glow is emanating from, just add little dashes of white, not too much, just little bits of white, because we'll be going over that with the fluorescent colour in a minute, but this just helps the fluorescent colour really shine. So yeah, as you can see, I'm just adding it into the central points of where I want those glows to be. Okay, once that's dry, get the Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red, give the bottle a really good shake, and you hear that ball bearing rattle around in the pot is a good sign that it's well shaken. And then straight out of the pot, a little bit like how you would add a contrast paint, just add the fluorescent red over the top of the red, so it's almost applying it like a glaze or contrast, where you're dragging the paint down towards the central point of the white, so that you leave the most of the red over the white itself. And that quick easy step gives you a really good glowing red effect. Very simple to do, very effective. And once you've applied this over your white areas, I then apply a final highlight using AK Fluorescent Orange, but only cover the points you want to be the most brightest and over those white areas. So where you painted the white, just do little dots of the orange and it will really make it pop. That part is optional. I just add it just to add some just central points of where that heat really is coming from. And there you go, with the orange finished. That's his head and glowing red effect done. The only other glowing red I've got on Abaddon is just done on the vents on his backpack. That is painted in exactly the same principles that we've just done the glowing effects. So you just base coat it in the wine red, add little highlight areas of the blood red, and then with the white add in little dots of the white where you want it to be hottest, go over that with the fluorescent red, and then find the little dots of the fluorescent orange. I don't show all of those images here because it's the same principles that we've just done, and I do obviously do other tutorials that are available that show this glowing effect in defined steps, but the principles are the same. Wine red to blood red, a little bit of white, then fluorescent red and fluorescent orange will give you a nice glowing vent effect. Okay, now we're on to non-metallic metal silver. So we did the gold in the first video, now we're moving on to the silver using two colours. Actually it's three. So what I've done is anything that is going to be silver, even the skulls actually here, I've just base coated in AK Tenebrous Grey. Gives a nice dusky blackish purplish base coat to everything. Then the two colours we're going to be using are from Vallejo. They're Vallejo Basalt Grey, a very, very dark grey colour, and then also from Vallejo we've got Silver Grey, which is a very, very almost white colour. First off, what we're going to be doing is defining our shapes, where we want the highlights to be. So I'm not base coating the entire area with Basalt Grey, probably 90%. I'm leaving the deepest, darkest areas still as the Tenebrous Grey. So yeah, probably less than 95% is probably covered with this Basalt Grey, just leaving tiny areas left of the Tenebrous Grey, usually around the river holes, any sort of dents and stuff that they've modelled into it in the sculpt. And obviously for this we've got a sort of grim dark style for Abaddon, so I am leaving quite a lot of dark areas. But this Basalt Grey, make sure you edge highlight everything. That's the first part. It all needs to be edge highlighted really, and then I'm covering 95% of the areas, following the natural shapes of where you'd like the sort of where you'd want the highlights to be. So those areas that are sort of, I'm imagining here the sunlight is coming down diagonally from the sort of top of his sword down, so across his left arm, left shoulder downwards. So my bright points will be anything in that zone and catching it, trying to keep my shadows up on the right hand side as we're looking at him now, and then just working around. But as I say, 90-95% cover with the Basalt Grey. And so on Abaddon, for me it's this sort of area of the top of his armour with all the spikes and skulls and stuff. Obviously the Talon of Horus, and there's some bullets coming down from his gun, the chain on his skulls, and yeah, I think that's sort of it really for the silver parts. If you wanted to do any of his gold trim in the silver, you would follow this same principle of the Basalt Grey as your base colour. Right, once it's all base coloured, we then make pretty much a 50-50 mix of the Basalt Grey and the Silver Grey. It's probably, maybe 60-40 in favour of Basalt Grey, but what we're sort of doing now is the mid-tone. So the base tone is the Basalt Grey, mid-tone is the 50-50 mix, and then we would do another mix maybe of a 80-20 more towards the Silver Grey, and then a final Silver Grey highlight. So what we're doing here is I'm pretty much, again, not edge highlighting everything, probably 80% is being edge highlighted, 70-80%, and now I'm defining the shape of things. So this is really where I want my highlights to really be, where I want the sun to be reflecting the most, and that would be over dents and scratches that have been modelled onto the sculpt. Obviously the edge highlighting, rivet holes, anywhere where you want the bright points to be. As I said, for this model, I'm coming from the left side down, so picking out any edges on the left side that are closer than the shadowed areas, and just really anywhere on the model that I want to stand out to the person that's going to be using it. I don't want to be putting highlights in places that don't make sense, but also this is going to be on the tabletop, and I want that it's not a display model, so ideally you want highlights to be picking out the good points of the model. Don't leave anything that should be standing out, don't leave that dark, let it stand out. If we were going for a sort of a display piece, then you do your highlights a little bit differently, whereas this is going to be used on the tabletop, so I'd like it all to have as realistic highlights as we can do. And now we're just adding more Silver Grey into that 50-50 mix, probably making, as I said, an 80-20 mix, just doing the same principles that we just did then, but just on smaller areas. Just again, edge highlighting on those areas you really want to be bright, picking out, especially on his talons, picking out all those sharp edges on his talons. We're applying this less and less and less now, so this is probably over maybe 20-30%, not even that, of the areas that we've just been covering. Don't go over the top with your highlighting, obviously, because the more highlights you have, the less they're actually highlights. But obviously if you don't have enough, then it doesn't look right. So it's a learning curve of where to put them. Obviously if you do it wrong, just go back over it with one of your mid-tones or the base colour and start again. This is just very thin layers of paint. You won't conceal any detail if you have to just base coat it again. I spent quite a bit of time on the talons themselves. I wanted them to stand out nicely, so that again the shine points aren't necessarily representative of where the light is, but I just really wanted them to shine and to. So quite a main point of the model, right? His sword, Drachnia, the talons, and around the face. That top sort of third of the model is a lot of detail and really good spots of the model, so that's why I wanted to stand out. and then I thin down the Silver Grey and do the final highlight before we move on to the finishing touches, which is another video, the final highlights, because I prefer for the model to be complete before I add in the very final highlights, just to see how it's developed. But this now is almost, you could treat this as your final highlight. So this would just be picking out the points that are really catching the light, your central points of brightness. Not too much, about 5% of the area. Just go around picking out any areas you really want to be bright and to stand out. In a later stage that's on this video, I'll be making a wash of the Citadel contrast Basilicum Grey, making a heavy wash of that, one drop of Basilicum Grey to maybe 5, 6, 7 drops of water. And the silver areas, these non-metallic metal areas, I'll be going over the whole of it with that contrast, just so that it blends all the colours together, and it also deepens the shadows. I do 2 washes of that over it, and it just lessens the highlights a little bit, but also adds some real contrast into those shadow areas. And then you can just go back and just add some touch points just to bring them back up in brightness. And that's the silver done. Now we can move on to painting the skulls. And for this, as I said before, we've base coated in the Tenebrous Grey at first. So base coat all of your skulls in Tenebrous Grey. We'll then do another base coat of AK Leather Brown. Cover all of the skulls. You can leave some of the recesses in the Tenebrous Grey, so that's almost like a wet dry brush that we're doing here, but you could also just do a full dry brush, but I've got a bit more paint on the brush here. This is more of a sort of wet dry brush, covering, you're probably covering 95% of your skulls in this colour, leaving only the deepest recesses, and where there's sort of two skulls joining each other, just leave a little bit of that, of the Tenebrous Grey shown. So yeah, covering 90-95% here with the leather brown. If you're using Citadel, I would suggest probably using Steel Legion Drab as this base layer. Okay, so the second coat will be with AK Mud Brown, which is like Xandri Dust if you were doing the Citadel range, but I'm using AK Mud Brown. Then the colour after that is AK Light Earth. So with the Mud Brown, this is our sort of first highlight, covering possibly 50% of the skulls, picking out any areas, you know, the eye sockets, the top of the skulls, any scratches, dents, broken parts, the teeth, like almost like how you would paint a face. We're doing exactly the same principles, we're just using different colours. So this Mud Brown is your sort of secondary base layer, gives a nice dusty sort of finish to the overall look of the skulls. I think in the Citadel range, yeah, Xandri Dust would be your colour you would use here. Then after that we've applied our Mud Brown to all of your skulls, then apply your next, which is your main first highlight, is going to be with AK Light Earth. Water it down a little bit because it is quite bright, and just there you pick out your sockets, your teeth, the nose area, any scratches or dents. You're probably covering 10-20% of those areas with that. And then I just then went and touched up some areas with AK Ivory, which would be sort of your Shabti bone in the Citadel range. Those I just picked out on the top to the most worn areas where I imagine the skulls had been on there a long time, and that was picking out the big scratches and cracks that are on the skulls. So the brighter the skull was how much more worn it was for this model that I was doing today. With the skulls done, the last part on there is the Space Marine helmet. I was choosing Ultramarines for mine, so for that I just used two colours. I used AK Oxford Blue and AK Ducat Blue. So the Oxford Blue just covered pretty much 99% of the helmet. The Ducat Blue was just used to just bring out some highlights, not too many, as I imagine it was pretty battle worn. Obviously, paint the helmet to whatever scheme you've got, your Blood Angels or whichever faction that you want to. Some people paint it the faction of the army they play against most, which offers a nice touch to when you're popping them on the field and the dead bodies all over your bases are for the models that you're actually facing against. It's quite good fun to do that. My customer wanted just an Ultramarine on this one. And with that done, as I mentioned, the next stage just shows where I've made the wash of the Basilicum Grey, and just use that, just wash that all over the non-metallic silver areas, just to bring in. So I'm pushing the paint up into the shadows. You can see there where you leave the brush is where the most paint will be left. And that's the final stage of this section. In the next video we'll be learning to do the leather and some more of his armour. But as you can see now, we've covered quite a lot of the model now. A lot of the big stuff is done. And yeah, just his leather cape, the sword, and some highlighting of his armour to do. There's the finished model that we're moving on to. So yeah, next up is the leather and some other bits, and then the final video will be the sword and finishing touches. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe as always. Happy painting!